I'm going to move to a few minutes panel discussion with Steve, Maddy and Gamiel. So I invite them to switch their cameras back on, if that's okay. Thank you. And what we're going to do first of all is that in the order that thanks very much. I can see you, so that's great. You're back online with me. Never quite know if it's all going to work, but it seems to be working in the technical field for us today. So that's good news. So in the order in which you spoke, you've had, I know Steve's had a little bit more chance to look at the chat than Maddy has. So Maddy, you might still be looking, but Steve, looking at some of the issues that have been posed today in the chat and so forth, and perhaps, I don't know if you've picked one question or if you've reframed a few that you want to bring together, but just say to us what you would like to address for a few minutes, please.
Yes, I will, and thank you, Carol. And no, I didn't have any more time because I was listening to them. And it's always daunting to answer questions in this way, because you want to engage in a conversation, don't you? Because all of us who work collaboratively, we know there are no easy answers to any of these questions, is it? But anyway, what I picked up on was that there are a number of questions that sort of picked up on the difference in the language we use, the values that we have, the fact that this leads to misunderstandings and frustrations and conflicts and so on. And I think we will all say that yes, that is characteristics of working collaboratively, certainly when you work across organizational and professional boundaries. So you're bound to have sort of conflicts and so on. And I don't think it's too provocative to say that if you have none of that, then probably you might find yourself ending up in a situation where you will be cuddling each other for years and making little actual difference. So there is something about, if you want to address things differently, or if you want to achieve something that your organization can't achieve on its own, then you are bringing together individuals and organizations with different experiences and expertise. And that means that we will be using different languages, different terminology. We're all guilty of doing that. And it does mean that misunderstandings can happen, that you need to spend a lot more time when you work outside, or with individuals or outside your own organization. So I think in terms of what we do about this, what our research would suggest, that organizations should think very carefully, first of all, about whether or not they need to work collaboratively with other organizations in order to address a specific challenge or an issue, or contribute to a big societal issue, for example. And if the answer to that is yes, then you have to be prepared to invest more time in it in order to think about how you communicate, where your values different, what different aims you have, and so on. And in our research, we have explored a lot of the complexity that underpins many of these themes. And I would say to people who have joined us today that if you are interested in exploring some of that in more detail, then you can find it via our CVSL web pages. And also the Open University has what we call an open access repository. So maybe somebody could put that link in the chat for us, because you can go in there, you can search on authors, you can find articles that we have written, and some of it we do try to write it in a less academic language. But so in terms of the particular, take language, for example, and the terminology that we use, I think what the research suggests, that you shouldn't try to impose somebody's way of communicating onto a collaboration. That actually is about taking longer to make sure that individuals and organizations have the chance to express themselves in language that is familiar to themselves. Because often what happens is we use the same words and they mean different things. So everything in collaboration takes longer, I think. So yeah. In terms of there were also questions about, like, how do we encourage people to address conflict? How do we avoid stagnation, right? And that's hard. And I think it requires you to build trust so that people feel that they are able to communicate and to share what they really believe and what they feel about an issue, and invest time in that. So I think if it's possible to start collaborating across and with other people and organizations, with something that is perhaps less ambitious, so that you build up an understanding of how you work together, you build up trust gradually, and then maybe from that basis you can move on and do more ambitious things. However, do we have the luxury of time? And I think that's a key question for us. I'm going to stop there, Carol, so I don't hog all the time.
No, thank you for that. There's so much in there, and so much that reflected, I think, things that Gamiel and Maddy said as well about, you know, I think I used to think that collaboration and conflict were two completely separate things, but I think you've all really clearly said collaboration and conflict so often are intertwined, aren't they? And finding ways to have those difficult conversations and say things that perhaps we tend not to want to say out loud, but if we don't, then how do we continue? So yeah, thank you very much for that. Gamiel, I'm going to go to you next. I don't know if you've chosen one question again, or if you picked out perhaps a few things from different questions.
Hi, Carl. I picked out a few, but I just want to carry on where Civ finished. And from my experience of community engagement, as I said, we've done 36 research projects. We've developed ambassador programs for Channel 4, linking into the diversity of communities in Bradford and Leeds when they moved up to Leeds. And my experience is, don't just target one organization. We have to meet organizations where they're at, and every organization in terms of trust will be at a different level. Some organizations will know you, some organizations never heard of you, other organizations may know somebody that knows you, but it's about time, and I really appreciate time is precious. So let's try and engage, let's send out information to multiple organizations. And this really addresses two of my the questions. One is around engaging with grassroots organizations, and the other one is how we communicate. And it's difficult getting through the door of community organizations. How do we make the first step? And having learned from corporate organizations that networking is key to everything, and who we network with is vital. And for me, how I get through doors, and bear in mind I organize hundreds of focus groups, to get individuals from different communities involved in things. I used to start off with targeting small African Caribbean centres, Asian women's projects, etc. Now what I do is I focus on religious establishments. And if we think about most of the deprived communities, every single ethnic minority community in the UK will be based in the most deprived areas of that town and city. We will have a few exceptions, particularly within the Chinese community. But when we're talking about sort of, a lot of Asian communities, Pakistani, Bangladesh, Indian, African, and Caribbean, you will find that, there are huge proportions in those areas. But what you also find is that there are mosques, there are synagogues, there are temples, there are black churches in all of those areas. And what I do is I invite myself in. Every single religious establishment is open to everybody. And this is about being uncomfortable and taking that step into an organization and start talking to people. And my first question to people is, tell me about yourself. And honestly, people just start opening up. And just by saying, tell me more, we're afraid to even ask the first question, never mind the second. So we just need to be braver. We need to be confident in our own ability, but also we need to have common purpose, common issues that communities have that we can help them address, because they will have the same issues that we're having. And also the big bonus for everybody in our sector is that there is funding available. We can, in fact, if Mr. Revel is still on, organisations like Community Foundation are phenomenal in terms of support. They may not be able to support everybody, but if the purpose is conducive to their objectives, then they will get involved. So there's lots out there. We start, as I say, I always start now with religious establishments. I will go into mosques. I get invited into mosques, as I say, to talk, but also to engage with the different education sort of parts of the mosque. Within mosques, they don't just pray. There is so much more that goes on within mosques and black churches and synagogues, temples, gurdwaras, etc. So that's where I get all of my success, and it's so much easier because everybody involved in the religious establishment is interested in doing good for their communities. I can go on, but shall I stop there?
Well, I think we'd love to talk to you much longer about it, Gamiel, but time is pressing, so I will move us forward. But I take there your message to us to be brave and to be willing to be uncomfortable, which isn't always what comes to many of us instinctively, is it? Maddy, can I come to you? I don't know if you want to continue some of those themes, or if you've seen something else in the chat you want to respond to.
I was going to pick up the baton smoothly from Gamiel around talking to people and engaging. There's a few questions in the chat about kind of leadership with humility and engaging people and collaborations. And I think as before you said it, Gamiel, I was sitting here thinking, well, it's not about the organisation, it's about the person. And you've always got to go and talk to the person. And if you build a relationship with the person, then kind of the rest will follow. So I think that point about relating to people, not organisations, applies at all levels through the system. Thinking about sort of the human approach to leadership, I was thinking about, so what's my role as a leader? And particularly over the last 12 months, what has my role as a leader been? And I think it's very much about bringing energy to a room, about giving direction and focus to a room. It's about absorbing stress to kind of try and free other people up to get on and do the things that matter most, so they can do the things which will make a difference. And kind of putting me to one side. I'm the least important person in this room, but I need to scan the room to make sure the right people are in the room and notice who's not here, as well as who is here, and then adjust and build from there. And I've got two, what I think are great examples, but I would do because I was involved in them. One is, like many other local places, the VCS Infrastructure in Sheffield set up a COVID hub network. We had 40 odd organisations on a twice weekly call initially, where it was community organisations, charities in the city who were supporting people, giving the space to have the conversations about what we were doing, what the latest government guidelines was, to collectively throw our hands up in the air or to kind of look at where we could work together. And some of the best things from that meeting didn't happen in the meeting. But there are people I met twice a week and then once a week, and that group is still going on that I've still not met in real life. But as an example, one of the things that came out of that was one of the local Afro-Caribbean associations hooking up with one of the cancer support organisations and getting the Afro-Caribbean community much more tied into early cancer screening. I didn't do anything to achieve that other than hold the room. But I like to feel I had a little bit to play in what could then be a massive relationship going forward to get a group of people who might not otherwise have engaged hooked into something which is really important. That was really good. And then the other one is about discomfort, I think. So one of the other things we did was look at the VCS leadership structures and say, they're not good, they're not representative, they're just too white. And we dismantled them and worked with a group of 8 organisations. Okay, so what do we need going forward? Which was half leaders, people of colour, and half leaders from who'd been traditionally involved, some of the white organisations. And some of those conversations were so difficult, and I came out just feeling wretched and like, oh my God, what are we doing? It felt so hard, and I just felt so uncomfortable. But we got to such a good place. And we built a new leadership group, which was so powerful. And as I was leaving VAS, they were sort of having its second and third meetings. And what that group was achieving and doing was just phenomenal, because we had the bravery to hold those uncomfortable conversations, to not shut it down, to ask who isn't in the room and bring them in. And again, from there, we're looking at how the VCS is stepping into some of the rebuilding in Sheffield and is really stepping into that system space. And a lot of what it brings is the knowledge, the relationships, the intelligence, which is now being recognised and heard. So those two things feel really important, I guess, about people and leadership. And I'd perhaps go back to, I think, where I started with my thinking, and Gamiel references as well, of feeling really privileged to be in this position and to have been in these positions, to be able to listen to and understand some of that intelligence which lies in communities. And one of the very specific questions early on in the chat was a PhD student saying, how do I get into communities? I think I'd say, think about what you bring. What do you bring to the table? Because communities, they are such a wealth of knowledge, information, intelligence. And being parochial from my side of the fence and the voluntary sector, it feels too often that the system or the council or the hospital or indeed the PhD student comes along saying, we want some of your knowledge, we want to take it off you, and then we never see it again. So what will you bring back to that community, to that organisation, which kind of makes it worth their while? Which sounds a bit Machiavellian, but it's about not taking information and what feels like stealing it, making it your own and not giving anything back from it. And that, I think, is really important to a set of researchers to think about, is how are you enhancing the VCS? What do you bring to the table?
I think that's a great challenge to make to those of us who are researchers, that we, although we may start from a genuine interest in making a difference to the sector, it's very easy in your research work actually to lose that, and a challenge for us to make sure that we bring the insights, we share the insights, and it's a continued sort of co-produced process, and our learning goes both ways. We use the term knowledge exchange, and it's interesting because knowledge exchange does suggest a two-way process, doesn't it, and not just a one-way process. So a lot for us researchers to reflect on there. Thank you. There are a lot of things coming up in the chat, yeah. But I did say I'd go back around the three of you. So Gamiel, I'll give you one chance, and then I'm going back around the three of you just to ask the final question, if that's okay. Time is pressing.
Thank you, Carol. I just wanted to really emphasize the fact that if somebody offers to support you or to help you, make sure you get back to them. And I say that from lots of experience of offering help to voluntary sector organisations, quite specifically, and nobody really getting back to me. And it does happen quite a lot. And if that's happening to some of the community organisations that are offering you support, then that's how you lose trust. So it's vitally important that if we connect, we make sure we make the most of the opportunities that we have.
Thank you. So there are lots of comments in the chat. Please do continue to engage there if you can. There are some specific ones, but we promised we would end with the question at the top about, or end our morning, or nearly end our morning session, at least end the panel, with the question at the top of our agenda today. What next for leading voluntary sector organisations? So that's what I'm going to pose back to you, the three of you, starting with Steve and then going around in the same order. Pick up on the chat if you want to, or just respond from your other work. Steve.
Thank you, Carol. So, well, I'm going to think about leadership in collaborative context as opposed to specifically for the voluntary sector, because I'm just not expert like you are. But I think I'm tempted to pick up on what I heard Maddy talk about just now, which is that there is something about understanding you as the individual, you as the leader, and how you act, versus also thinking about leadership more generally and what that means. So we in CVSL tend to think about leadership as about making things happen. And the moment you think about leadership as making things happen, you also recognize that there are loads and loads and loads of individuals who actually make things happen. So I think that's still valid, sort of understanding what that means as we go forward. I also think that theory is lagging a little bit behind practice in terms of understanding leadership in the context that you're all working. So we have something to learn. But we do also have colleagues who write about, who research, who think about kind of leadership as a process, thinking about, as we talked about earlier, how you create leadership that is more appropriate to different communities of belonging and so on. So for me, Carol, it relates back to one of the questions that I posed in my presentation this morning, which is about, do we have to change the way in which we think about collaboration, given that the context is now different? And what does that mean in terms of collaboration? So I think it's still, if you think about leading in a collaborative context, I think it's still valid to think about how you embrace, empower, involve, and mobilize individuals and organizations. So all of those are challenging in its own right. So if you're thinking about embracing individuals, we talked, or certainly I don't know if these comments were in the chat or whether we talked about it or any of talked about it, but there is something about how you encourage people to be involved who may be reluctant to be involved. How do you get the right stakeholders around the table? And then once you have encouraged individuals, how do you empower them? How do you as a leader help them make sure that they can contribute? So there you're thinking about having individuals that are coming to the collaboration with different skills, different experiences, different languages, and so on. So what is your role as a leader in trying to help individuals feel empowered to make a difference, and so on? Involving perhaps is about thinking about power differences, that, you know, there are power differences. How do you negotiate that? What is your role as an individual in trying to negotiate the inevitable power difference between organizations when they collaborate? How do you mobilize organizations to work on behalf of the collaboration, whilst recognizing that organizations also need to have something in return? So there is something about understanding what is the nuance, what is it about our context now that tells us something about how we embrace, empower, involve, and mobilize. And then finally, Carol, I'm going to shut up soon, I promise. But of course, we also know that if you that sometimes you move into a situation of inertia, things just stagnate, right? It's about how you move beyond embracing, empowering, involving, and mobilizing. If people are reluctant to talk about differences, if people are reluctant to talk about conflict. And so there, you as a leader may have to do a little bit of gentle manipulation, a little bit of influencing, a little bit about playing the politics in order to move the collaboration forward. So sometimes you have a bit of this tension between, you know, being facilitative and being directive, right? And understanding the context as we come out of the pandemic is going to continue to be hugely important for us. So a lot for us to hopefully work on collaboratively in order to understand leadership in the voluntary sector. So thank you. Hope I didn't take too long.
Thank you, Steve. Don't worry. I think we have quite a long lunch break, so we will be finishing 5 or so minutes later. So Gamiel and Maddy, please take the time you need to respond. Gamiel.
Okay, for me, it's about seeing people like me and like other different ethnic groups at the top of your organization. And I don't mean chief execs, I don't even mean directors. I'm talking about board members. And you may think this is sort of a flippant remark, but everybody that I've got to be trustees in organizations have come off of one conversation, and that conversation has been, wow, I really liked what you said in that meeting. Have you thought about sort of being a trustee? And on every single person I've spoke to, they've gone, what do you mean by a trustee? The lack of knowledge around the role of a trustee, and again, what that will do in terms of supporting the communities that they represent, but also enhancing their knowledge, their experience, their competencies, etc. It doesn't take much to encourage somebody. We just need to make sure, and I think this is a whole sector-wide challenge, is that understanding of the role of a trustee and the fact that, it's your lived experience that we want. It's your experience of working within your communities. It could be your experience of, of working in diversity and inclusion. And just to share with you, I've seen so many more non-exec roles recently for people focused on diversity and inclusion, whereas previously finance, business, etc. So by getting somebody involved in your organization that has an idea of the diversity and inclusion of your communities would be a brilliant investment. And again, I just think we need to be proactive. And I promise you, it is not complex at all. It's just having that share, or getting individuals to understand who you are, why you're interested in them, and what it is that they can do in terms of contributing to their own communities. So I'm not going to say too much on that.
Thank you so much, Gamiel. I think there's so much in all of these responses we could go on and discuss, but I'm going on to you, Maddy.
Gamiel, I want a conversation about that, because that's something I've been talking about in NAVCA. Both for NAVCA, how do we diversify our board, but as a network, so many CVSs are too white-led, and how do we encourage the network, facilitate the network to have a greater representation, particularly on the board of trustees. But I would add to it, I hope add to it, in that I think those board of trustees and also need to look at how they're working, so they're welcoming, and the people who can come in can really take the step and have a voice and have influence. It's not just get other people in and carry on regardless like we did before, it's fine, tick the box. It's got to be a really fundamental look at how we work and how we listen to those wider voices and take them into account in how we make decisions. But yeah, I'd love to follow up with you on that.
Yeah, can I just add to that? It took me 2 years to actually feel that I had a voice and I was listened to. I mean, people heard me, but I didn't feel as if I was listened to for about 2 years.
That's not uncommon, I don't think, and people leave because they don't feel, not even just listened to, but don't feel able to contribute. Can I not have that, Carol, as my contribution? that was Gamiel's contribution as well. My two things that I would pick up go back to what I was saying earlier. I think there's two big responsibilities for leaders in the VCS. One is to enable and support a thriving voluntary sector. So my own organisation and the organisations that I'm connected with and work with. And people are going to need the VCS more than ever over the next few years, but we need to reconfigure and grow. And people are exhausted. So we're looking at trying to reconfigure and grow. We're looking at being absolutely essential to society as we go forward, with a group of trustees, of staff, of volunteers who are on their knees. And so how do we take those people over the next few months and support them, enable them, try to regrow and rebuild? That is just going to be so important as we hit this cliff edge of austerity and furlough and housing and poverty and everything else. But while we're doing that, I think as VCS leaders, we've also got a responsibility to be part of the wider system. And I will talk about it from a local point of view, because I think that's what is really important. That as local authorities look to rebuild and grow post-COVID, they've got to do that using the intelligence, the relationships, the capacity of all bits of the system, including the VCS. So we've got to be able to contribute to those wider COVID recovery plans and take our place at the table. The door's been opened by COVID, but we've got to step through it and take that place. And those two things are in tension, because how do we look after our people who are on their knees whilst we're being pulled into this massive beast of a machine, which is COVID recovery? And that's going to be a massive challenge, but that's the thing that we as leaders need to most rise to and step into.
Well, thank you so much, Steve, Maddy and Gamiel, for everything that you've brought to us this morning. Unfortunately, we do need to wrap the panel up and move on, but there's so many issues there that I know we could all discuss together, and maybe many opportunities for follow-up, and I'm sure people will be making connections via LinkedIn and websites and so forth. But thank you very much for the contribution that you've made to this morning's session.